Nobody called it a feast. It was just Sunday. The greens had been simmering since before sunrise. The cornbread came out of the skillet still hot, and the roast had been in the oven since the family walked out the door for church. That table held more food than most restaurants serve in a sitting, and every dish came from a woman who never once cracked open a cookbook. Number 16 on this list had a name that made children laugh and a taste that made grown men quiet. Number 7 split whole church congregations right down the middle. And number 1 covered every plate on this table without a single person ever asking for it by name. These were not just meals. They were the proof that a family made it through another week, and they were worth sitting in a hot pew for 3 hours to earn. Hit subscribe, because this list runs 30 deep. Here are 30 Sunday table dishes Black families made after church. Number 30, butter beans. Large flat lima beans simmered in a pot with a ham hock, onion, salt, and black pepper until the beans went soft and the cooking liquid turned into a thick, creamy broth. Butter beans broke down more than any other bean in the pot, and that breakdown was the whole point. The starch released into the liquid and thickened it naturally, so the broth clung to a spoon without flour or cream. They sat on the Sunday table in a deep bowl, the beans pale and swollen, the broth pooled beneath them. A piece of cornbread went into that broth before a fork touched anything else. Number 29, turnip greens, sharper than collards, with a peppery bite that woke up the whole plate. Cooked the same way, low and slow in a heavy pot with a smoked ham hock or a piece of salt pork, but the flavor landed differently. Turnip greens had a mineral edge that made them stand apart on a table crowded with milder sides. Some families cooked the turnip roots alongside the greens and mashed them separately with butter. Others threw the roots away and kept only the leaves. Either way, the potlikker at the bottom was dark and smoky, and cornbread went into it before the meal was halfway done. Number 28, fried okra. Fresh okra sliced into rounds, tossed in cornmeal with salt and pepper, and fried in a cast iron skillet until the coating turned golden and crunchy. The slime that kept people away from okra disappeared completely in hot oil. High heat and a dry cornmeal coat solved it. Fried okra came out of the skillet onto a paper towel and went on the table in the same bowl. Children who refused boiled okra ate the fried version by the handful, and by the time the table was cleared, the bowl was empty. Number 27, string beans with new potatoes. A heavy pot on the back burner, simmering for hours with a smoked ham hock or a piece of fatback dropped in for flavor. The beans went soft, the potatoes went tender, and the potlikker at the bottom turned into something people drank from a cup when they thought nobody was watching. This was an all-day commitment. The beans were snapped by hand, usually by whoever was sitting on the porch that morning, and the potatoes were small ones, dug fresh if there was a garden. The modern version with crisp green beans and a squeeze of lemon would not have been recognized in these kitchens. Number 26, candied sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes peeled, sliced thick, layered in a baking dish with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a splash of vanilla, then baked until the sugar melted into a syrup and the potatoes went soft enough to cut with a spoon. Some families laid marshmallows across the top in the last few minutes. Others refused. The marshmallow question divided Sunday tables as sharply as any argument about cornbread. But the dish underneath was the same. The sweet potatoes caramelized at the edges where they touched the pan, and the syrup at the bottom was dark and sticky and worth scraping out after the potatoes were gone. Number 25, smothered pork chops, bone-in pork chops, seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in flour, and browned hard in a cast iron skillet until the crust turned dark on both sides. Then came the onions, sliced thick and piled on top with enough broth to come halfway up the chops. The lid went on, the heat went down, and the pork chops braised until the onions dissolved and the gravy thickened around them. The flour from the dredge and the fawn on the bottom of the pan built the gravy without a roux. By the time the lid came off, the chops were tender enough to pull apart with a fork, and the onion gravy had turned dark and rich. The rice on the plate existed for one purpose, and that was to catch every drop. Number 24, squash casserole, yellow crookneck, squash boiled until soft, mashed with butter, eggs, onion, salt, and pepper, mixed with crushed saltine crackers, and baked until the top turned golden. Some families added a layer of cheese, others let the squash speak for itself. It came out of the oven puffed and set like a custard, and it sat on the table next to the heavier dishes as the one thing that tasted light without trying. In gardens across the South, yellow squash grew faster than anyone could eat it, and this casserole was how families kept up. Number 23, corn pudding, not cream corn from a can, though canned corn sometimes went into the mixture when fresh ears were out of season. This was a baked custard made with eggs, butter, sugar, and corn, poured into a dish and cooked until the center barely set. The top browned slightly. The inside stayed soft and almost sweet. It sat somewhere between a vegetable side and a dessert, and nobody minded. Corn pudding traveled well in a covered dish and held its temperature longer than most things on the table. It rarely got talked about, but the dish always came back empty. Number 22, banana pudding, layers of vanilla wafers, sliced bananas, and homemade custard made from eggs, sugar, milk, and vanilla, stacked in a deep dish and topped with meringue browned under the broiler. The wafers softened overnight as the custard soaked through them, and by Sunday, the layers had melded into something that held together on a spoon but dissolved the moment it hit the tongue. Banana pudding was not a weeknight dessert. The custard had to be cooked on the stove and stirred constantly. The meringue had to be beaten stiff and browned without burning. It showed up on the Sunday table in the same glass dish every week, and it started arguments about whether it was better cold or at room temperature. Number 21, stewed cabbage, a whole head of green cabbage cut into wedges, cooked slowly in a pot with a smoked ham hock, onion, vinegar, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar. The cabbage went in firm and pale and came out soft, translucent, and steeped in the smoky broth. A single head fed a crowd, and it needed nothing more than a piece of smoked pork and thyme. On the Sunday table, stewed cabbage sat in a deep bowl. The cooking liquid pooled at the bottom, and the cornbread went into that liquid the same way it went into potlikker from greens. Cabbage never got the same respect as collards, but it showed up just as often and never came back with any left in the bowl. Number 20, giblet gravy, made from the neck, gizzard, heart, and liver of the chicken, simmered in broth, and then chopped fine and stirred into a roux. It went over rice, over biscuits, and sometimes straight over the meat it came from. Giblet gravy was proof that nothing went to waste. The parts of the bird that most people discarded were turned into something rich and deeply savory. The gizzard gave it texture. The liver gave it depth. Some families strained everything out and served a smooth gravy. Others left the chopped pieces in, and you knew exactly what you were eating. Number 19, smoked turkey wings. Whole turkey wings, brined overnight and smoked low over hickory or pecan wood until the skin turned dark mahogany and the meat pulled apart with 2 fingers. In some families, the wings were smoked outside on a barrel smoker or a pit dug into the backyard. In others, they were bought already smoked from a local butcher or a roadside vendor and braised at home in a covered pan with onions, garlic, and broth until the connective tissue broke down completely. A single smoked turkey wing from the tip to the drumette could cover a dinner plate. The smoking process concentrated the flavor of the dark meat and rendered out enough fat to make the skin crispy in places and chewy in others. The seasoning was simple because the smoke did most of the heavy work. Salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and a touch of paprika on the brine side. The rest was wood and thyme. On the Sunday table, smoked turkey wings occupied a particular space between the formal and the everyday. They were not as ceremonial as a roast, not as expected as fried chicken in every household, and not as cheap as neck bones. They showed up in families where someone knew how to work a smoker, and that person was usually the same one who ran the grill at the 4th of July cookout and the family reunion. Smoking was a skill passed down the same way recipes were, not written on paper, but learned by standing next to the pit. The wings sat on a platter, stacked, and each person took one and worked it with their hands. The bones went into a pot later in the week for soup or beans, and the drippings were saved for seasoning greens. Nothing was discarded. A smoked turkey wing was a piece of work that started the night before and finished on the plate, and the person who made it knew by feel when the fire was right and when to pull them off the grate. Number 18, cornbread dressing, not stuffing, dressing. The distinction mattered. Stuffing went inside the bird. Dressing was baked in its own pan, made from crumbled cornbread, mixed with broth, sage, onion, celery, and pepper, baked until the top was firm and the inside stayed moist. In many families, cornbread dressing showed up every Sunday, not just at Thanksgiving. The cornbread for the dressing was baked a day or two ahead and left out to go stale on purpose because dry cornbread absorbed the broth better. Some cooks added chopped boiled eggs. Others stirred in giblets. The base was always cornbread, and the seasoning was always heavy on the sage. Number 17, ambrosia salad, canned fruit cocktail, mandarin orange segments, shredded coconut, miniature marshmallows, and a generous fold of sour cream or whipped topping, all stirred together in a glass bowl and chilled. It was technically a salad. Nobody treated it like one. Children went to it before touching anything else on the table, and the adults who claimed they were too old for something that sweet always managed to find room. Ambrosia showed up at Sunday dinners, church socials, and holiday tables without fail, and the glass bowl it sat in was always one that belonged to a grandmother. Number 16, socket to me cake, a dense, buttery pound cake with a ribbon of cinnamon, brown sugar, and chopped pecans running through the center, baked in a bundt pan and turned out onto a plate where the swirl showed through every slice. The name came from a comedy sketch on television in the late 1960s, and the cake took the name and outlived the joke by decades. It showed up at church bake sales, Sunday tables, and family reunions, and the woman who brought it knew the cake would be gone before the main dishes were cleared. Socket to me cake needed no frosting, no decoration, and no explanation. The swirl did all the talking. Number 15, sweet potato pudding. Not the pie, the pudding. Grated raw sweet potato mixed with eggs, milk, butter, sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg, poured into a baking dish and cooked low and slow until the center set and the edges pulled away from the pan. Sweet potato pudding was older than the pie version, and in many families it was the original. The texture was denser and grainier, closer to a bread pudding than a custard, and it carried the flavor of the sweet potato harder because the potato was grated raw instead of cooked and mashed first. It sat on the dessert end of the table and was eaten warm, sometimes with a pour of evaporated milk over the top. Number 14, baked macaroni and cheese. Not the kind from a box, not the stovetop version with powdered cheese stirred in. This was a casserole, elbow macaroni cooked until just tender, mixed with eggs, evaporated milk, butter, and more cheese than seemed reasonable, poured into a baking dish, and baked until the top turned golden and the inside set into something closer to a custard than a pasta dish. Baked mac and cheese was the single dish most likely to cause an argument at a family gathering because everyone's grandmother made it differently and everyone's grandmother made it best. Some used sharp cheddar only. Others blended 2 or 3 cheeses together. Some layered sliced cheese on top before baking. Others stirred everything together and let the oven do the work. The eggs were the dividing line. Families that used eggs got a firmer, sliceable casserole. Families that skipped them got something looser, more like a sauce. On the Sunday table, the mac and cheese sat in the center because it was the one dish every person would eat. Children who refused greens ate mac and cheese. Elders who had trouble with tougher meats ate mac and cheese. Guests who did not know the family well reached for mac and cheese. It was neutral ground in a kitchen full of opinions. The cost was almost nothing. A box of elbows, a block of cheese, a can of evaporated milk, 2 eggs, and butter. Nobody ever made a small pan because leftovers were part of the plan. Monday lunch was cold mac and cheese cut into squares and eaten straight from the refrigerator, and somehow, cold, it tasted almost better. The Sunday table was never about a single dish. It was about the accumulation. 15 or 20 dishes spread across a table that was sometimes too small to hold them, with extra plates balanced on the counter and a card table pulled in from the other room. The women who cooked this food started on Saturday night. Some started on Friday. The greens went on first because they took the longest. The cakes were baked early because the oven was needed for the meat. Everything was timed to land on that table within minutes of walking through the front door after church, and the timing was never written down. It lived in the body. Number 13, collard greens, the undisputed anchor of the Sunday table. A full bunch of collard leaves stripped from the stems, washed multiple times in cold water to get the grit out, stacked, rolled, and sliced into ribbons. They went into a heavy pot with a smoked ham hock or turkey neck, onion, garlic, vinegar, salt, red pepper flakes, and enough water to cover. Then the lid went on and time did the rest. Collards cooked for hours. The leaves went from bright green to dark and silky, and the potlikker at the bottom turned into a deep, smoky broth that people sopped up with cornbread or drank straight from a cup. Every cook had an opinion, sugar or no sugar, vinegar in the pot or on the plate, smoked pork or smoked turkey. The arguments were never settled, but the dish itself was not optional. A Sunday table without collard greens was a table with something missing. Number 12, deviled eggs. Hard-boiled eggs cut in half, the yolks scooped out and mashed with mayonnaise, mustard, sweet pickle relish, salt and pepper, then spooned back into the whites and dusted with paprika. They sat on a plate in neat rows, and they were always the first thing to vanish. Deviled eggs were the dish every woman at the church brought at some point, and the ones known for theirs guarded the proportions. A little too much mustard, and the filling turned sharp. Too much mayonnaise, and it went loose. The relish had to be sweet, not dill. A dozen eggs made 24 halves, and a Sunday table for a large family needed at least 2 plates. Number 11, dirty rice. White rice cooked with finely chopped chicken livers and gizzards, onion, celery, bell pepper, garlic, and enough cayenne to make itself known. The ground organ meat turned the rice a dark speckled color that gave the dish its name. Dirty rice came from Louisiana and traveled east and north with families who brought their recipes with them. It sat on the table beside the gravy rice and held its own because the flavor was deeper and more complex. In families that made both, dirty rice was considered the grown-up version. Number 10, oxtail stew. For decades, oxtails were one of the cheapest cuts at the butcher counter. They were considered scrap, the tail of the cow, bony and full of connective tissue. Most people outside the Black community and Caribbean kitchens did not bother with them, which kept the price low. A few pounds braised for hours with tomatoes, onions, carrots, and garlic turned into something extraordinary. The connective tissue broke down into gelatin, and the braising liquid turned thick and rich. The meat came off the bone deeply flavored and fork tender. Then the price changed. As oxtails gained popularity in restaurants and on cooking shows, the cost climbed steadily. A dish that once defined resourcefulness became something many families could no longer justify on a Sunday budget. Number 9, country fried steak, a cheap cut of round steak pounded flat with the edge of a saucer or a heavy mallet until the fibers broke down and the meat spread thin, dredged in seasoned flour, fried in a skillet until the crust turned dark and craggy, then covered in a cream gravy made from the pan drippings, flour, milk, salt, and black pepper. The gravy went over the steak and over whatever else was on the plate, and nobody complained. The pounding was the work that made it possible. Round steak was tough and chewy without it. The mallet turned a cut that cost almost nothing into something that fell apart under a fork. In some kitchens, the steak was pounded on a wooden cutting board. In others, it was placed between 2 sheets of wax paper on the counter and beaten until the neighbors could hear it. Country fried steak showed up on a Sunday table in families where beef was the preferred meat, and it sat on the plate the way a centerpiece sits on a mantle. The gravy pooled around it, the rice soaked it up, and by the time the plate was cleared, the only thing left was a streak of white gravy. The women who made this dish understood that the pounding was not just preparation, it was transformation. A piece of meat that would have been tough and barely worth the price became something tender and rich, buried under a gravy that tasted like it belonged in a restaurant. The trick was never the seasoning. The trick was the patience to stand at that counter and beat the meat flat until the texture changed under your hand. Number 8, pineapple upside down cake, melted butter and brown sugar spread across the bottom of a cast iron skillet, pineapple rings laid in a circle with a maraschino cherry in the center of each one, then a simple yellow batter poured over the top and baked until the cake set firm. When it was done, the skillet was flipped onto a plate and the pineapple layer became the top, glistening and caramelized. The cherries glowed red in the center of each ring. It looked like a cake that took hours. It took 30 minutes of preparation and an hour in the oven, and the skillet it was baked in was the same one that fried the chicken and cooked the cornbread. Number 7, chitterlings. Say the word at a church dinner and watch the room divide. Half the people lean in, the other half find a reason to step outside. Chitterlings, called chitlins by everyone who actually ate them, are the cleaned and cooked intestines of a pig, simmered for hours until tender, then either served in their cooking liquid or fried crispy in a skillet. The smell is the dividing line. Cleaning them takes hours. The intestines have to be washed, turned inside out, scraped, and washed again multiple times in cold water. During the cooking, the smell fills the entire house and a good portion of the block. Families that cooked chitlins opened every window. Some cooked them outside on a separate burner. For the families that kept the tradition, chitterlings were a point of pride. They represented a direct line back to the parts of the animal that enslaved people were given, the scraps that slaveholders discarded. Taking those leftovers, cleaning them by hand, and turning them into something people craved was an act of culinary defiance that carried through every generation. Chitterlings showed up on the Sunday table during the colder months, especially around the holidays. They were served with hot sauce, cider vinegar, and chopped onions, and the people who loved them went back for seconds before touching anything else. In some families, the chitterlings were cooked at a relative's house and brought over already done just to keep the smell out of the host kitchen. In others, the smell was the announcement. There was no middle ground on chitterlings. The people who ate them treated the dish with a reverence that bordered on ritual. The cleaning was done in silence with cold hands over a sink that ran for an hour. The cooking took the rest of the day, and the eating was slow and deliberate, with hot sauce passed around the table and vinegar within reach. Here is what most people never calculated: the cost of a Sunday dinner for 10 or 12 in a house where the weekly grocery budget was already stretched to its limit was an act of quiet financial engineering that nobody ever received credit for. The women who ran these kitchens knew the price of every cut of meat in the store. They knew which vegetables were in season and which ones cost twice as much out of season. They bought oxtails and whole chickens and whatever the butcher marked down, and they turned them into dishes that tasted like they cost far more. The Sunday table was a performance of abundance built on scarcity, pulled off every single week by women who balanced a household budget in their heads and never let the table look thin. Number 6, fried catfish. Whole fillets or bone-in pieces, dredged in seasoned yellow cornmeal, dropped into a deep pot or cast iron skillet filled with hot oil, and fried until the coating turned dark golden and the fish curled at the edges. Catfish came from the river, the pond, or the market, depending on the family and the season. In rural communities, the fish was caught on a Saturday and cleaned and fried on Sunday. The cornmeal crust was coarse and crunchy, and it held on tight. The fish inside stayed moist and flaky, and the whole platter went on the table next to a bottle of hot sauce and a pile of white bread. Fried catfish on a Sunday table meant someone in the family fished, or someone knew a man who did. Number 5, rutabagas. Peeled, cubed, and boiled until tender, then mashed with butter, salt, and black pepper until they were smoothed. Rutabagas were larger and sweeter than turnips, and they cooked down into something almost golden. They were a cold weather vegetable stored in a root cellar or a cool closet, and they lasted for months. On the Sunday table, they sat quietly beside the greens and the beans, and they were the dish most likely to go unnoticed by anyone who had not grown up eating them. The people who knew them asked for a second helping. Everyone else passed the bowl without looking. Number 4, broccoli rice casserole. Cooked rice, stirred together with chopped broccoli, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a block of processed cheese, melted in, and sometimes a handful of French fried onions scattered on top before it went into the oven. It baked until the edges bubbled and the top turned golden brown. Broccoli rice casserole was a dish that arrived in Black Southern kitchens sometime in the 1960s and 1970s when canned soups became a casserole base in every cookbook aimed at home cooks. It stayed because it was easy, it fed a crowd, and children ate it without a fight. Number 3, pecan pie. Dark corn syrup, eggs, butter, vanilla, and a generous layer of pecan halves, baked in a single crust until the filling set and the nuts on top toasted golden. The pecans floated during baking and formed a crunchy layer that cracked under a fork. In the South, pecan trees grew in yards and along roadsides, and the nuts were gathered by hand in the fall and stored through the winter. A pecan pie cost almost nothing to make when the pecans came from the yard. It sat on the counter beside the cake and the cobbler, and it was the dessert the men reached for first. Number 2, creamed corn. Fresh ears of corn, the kernels cut off the cob, and the back of the knife scraped down each row to release the milk, then cooked slowly in a skillet with butter, a splash of cream, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar until the mixture thickened into something that held its shape on a spoon. Homemade creamed corn tasted nothing like what came from a can. The corn was still bright and sweet, the texture was rough instead of smooth, and the milk from the cob gave it a richness that no amount of cream could imitate. It was made only when corn was in season, and the women who made it from scratch did not bother with it any other time of year. Number 1, smothered chicken. A whole chicken cut into pieces, seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in flour, and browned in a cast iron skillet until the skin turned dark golden on every side. Then the chicken came out, the onions went in, and the gravy was built right there in the pan with flour, broth, and the brown bits stuck to the bottom. The chicken went back in, the lid went on, and it cooked low and slow until the meat was falling off the bone and the gravy had turned thick and dark. Smothered chicken was the centerpiece. It was the dish the table was built around, the one that determined everything else. If the chicken was smothered, the rice went underneath it, the greens sat beside it, the cornbread sopped up the gravy after the meat was gone. Every other dish on this list orbited the smothered chicken the way furniture orbits a fireplace, because the gravy touched everything on the plate and made it all taste like it belonged together. Southern potato salad was not just food, it was a test. Every woman at the fellowship table understood this, even if nobody said it out loud. The potatoes were boiled whole until just tender, then cooled, peeled, and cubed, never overcooked, because soft potato made runny salad, and runny salad was a judgment passed in silence. The dressing was mustard-based: mayonnaise, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, diced onion, celery, hard-boiled eggs, salt, and black pepper. None of them wrote it down. You learned it by watching the ratio, how long she held the mustard over the bowl before tilting the jar, what color the dressing turned when it was right. At church homecomings through the 1950s, bringing the potato salad meant accepting public evaluation. The women who had earned the right to bring it were known. The ones who tried before earning that right were also known. When the elder who made it right stopped coming, the salad everyone else brought was fine. It was never quite that.
Collard greens with ham hocks were the backbone of every potluck table, steaming and savory, filling the room with their deep, earthy scent. The greens were washed over and over in cool water, not just to clean them, but to honor the work that went into growing them. The ham hocks simmered for hours until the meat softened, sending flavor through every leaf. The pot itself would tremble gently on the stove as if humming along with the gospel songs on the radio. Grandmothers knew the timing by feel, not clocks, tasting the broth and nodding when it was ready. A good pot of greens could stretch a meal, feed a family, and feed a crowd all the same. When carried into the church basement, the steam fogged the lids of the serving trays, and everyone nearby could smell the salt, the smoke, and the love. These greens told stories about sharecropping days, about Sunday rest after long weeks, about making something nourishing from whatever you had. Nothing on that table ever felt more alive. Even if money was tight, you could always count on greens to show up, hearty and humble, served with hot sauce and pride. Black-eyed peas with ham hocks simmered in church kitchens year-round but held special significance on New Year's Day when congregations gathered to eat them for luck and prosperity. Dried peas were soaked overnight, then cooked slowly with a single ham hock that released smoky, salty flavor while onions and garlic added depth. The result was creamy beans in thick pot liquor served as soup or over rice, with ham hocks meat pulled from bone. Churchwomen understood a little meat went far when combined with beans, providing protein without the expense of steaks beyond most budgets. Black-eyed peas cost almost nothing, with dried bags available for pennies, perfect for feeding large crowds after Sunday service. The dish carried deep cultural significance, connecting congregations to Southern agricultural traditions and New Year's customs promising good fortune. Children ate them without complaint because pot liquor's richness made beans taste special, while adults appreciated both nutrition and continuity with tradition.
Crackling cornbread arrived in cast iron and smelled like November. Cracklings, the crisp, rendered pieces of pork skin and fat left after lard making, were folded into standard cornbread batter before the skillet went into the oven. The cracklings distributed through the bread as it baked, leaving pockets of salty, porky richness in every slice, the skin slightly chewier where it had softened in the batter. Lard rendering from hog killing was an annual fall event in rural Black Southern communities through the mid-20th century, and cracklings were its immediate byproduct, available in November when the weather turned cold enough for the process. The practice of incorporating rendered pork fat into grain-based breads reaches back into West African cooking traditions, where animal fat has long enriched otherwise plain starches. By the 1970s, as home hog killing faded, cracklings became harder to find fresh. The cornbread that replaced crackling cornbread was easier and missing something it could not name.
Candied yams were memory disguised as dessert, gleaming under syrup that caught the light like stained glass. They started as humble sweet potatoes, peeled and sliced by hand, then simmered with butter, sugar, and a whisper of cinnamon until they melted into themselves. Every forkful felt like Sunday comfort, the kind that lingered even after the plates were cleared. The smell filled every corner of the church hall, warm and familiar, bringing people back to childhood kitchens. There was something sacred about watching elders spoon them out with quiet pride. This dish did not need decoration. It already carried the glow of love. The yams were passed down like stories, like names, unchanged through generations because nothing about them needed fixing. When people said, "sweet," this is what they meant. The caramel syrup bubbled thick and glossy, coating every piece in warmth, the kind that stuck to memory long after taste faded. Sometimes a sprinkle of nutmeg or clove gave it a deeper note, but never too much. The sweetness spoke for itself. Candied yams did not rush. They took their time, slow and sure, like all things made with patience and heart. On church tables, their color alone brought smiles, that deep orange glow of comfort that meant home had arrived. Gullah red rice with sausage carried Carolina Low Country traditions into fellowship halls, a dish with roots in West African jollof rice seasoned through generations. Long grain rice was sautéed in bacon drippings with onions, bell peppers, and garlic before crushed tomatoes transformed the mixture into something rich and red, with smoked sausage adding protein. The rice absorbed every bit of flavor as it simmered, turning tender with each grain coated in tomato-rich seasoning. Churchwomen from coastal regions brought this proudly, knowing it represented cultural heritage connecting congregations to ancestors who never forgot their origins. Rice was inexpensive and fed dozens when stretched with vegetables and meat, making it practical for church budgets. The tomatoes added vitamins while sausage provided richness to satisfy working people arriving hungry. Gullah red rice appeared at Wednesday suppers and Sunday dinners, signaling someone understood honoring traditions while feeding community.
Ambrosia was the dessert salad that appeared at every church homecoming table from about May through September, sitting at the edge between side dish and sweet. In its 1950s church form, it was layers of canned mandarin oranges, crushed pineapple, shredded coconut, miniature marshmallows, and sour cream folded through to bind everything into a cold, sweet, faintly tangy cloud. Ambrosia had begun as a luxury item in the 19th century South, made with fresh coconuts and oranges that only the prosperous could afford regularly. Canned goods democratized it entirely. By the 1940s, a can of mandarin oranges and a bag of coconut flakes made it accessible to every church kitchen. The women who brought it understood this history without needing to say it. What was once expensive was now theirs. The bowl was always empty before the other dishes. When the church ladies who brought it stopped coming, the ambrosia stopped too, replaced by nothing in particular.
Fried whiting fish was the heartbeat of summer services and Sunday fundraisers, popping and hissing in cast-iron skillets behind the church. The fish was dredged in seasoned cornmeal, fried until golden and crisp, the edges curling slightly as they hit the hot oil. The sound alone could bring a crowd. Children ran back and forth with paper plates while elders fanned themselves with church programs, laughing and waiting for the next batch. You could taste the salt of the sea, the crunch of tradition, the work of hands that knew how to stretch a meal. Fried whiting was affordable, filling, and familiar, something every soul food cook could trust to come out right. Sometimes it was served with white bread and mustard, sometimes with coleslaw and hush puppies, but always with pride. It was food that traveled well, from kitchen to fellowship hall to picnic table, and it never lost its magic. Every piece was a little miracle of patience and grease, the taste of good company and good faith. Buttermilk cornbread from scratch emerged from church ovens in cast-iron skillets seasoned through decades, creating golden rounds with crispy bottoms and tender crumbs that soaked up Potlikker perfectly. Stone-ground cornmeal was mixed with buttermilk, eggs, flour, baking powder, and salt before being poured into smoking hot skillets greased with bacon drippings that created the signature crust. The result tasted nothing like store-bought varieties, with slight tang from buttermilk and richness from drippings. Churchwomen competed quietly over whose cornbread achieved perfect texture, not too dry and not too cake-like, but substantial enough to fill stomachs and complement every dish. Cornmeal was among the cheapest staples available, with 5-pound bags costing less than $1. The bread appeared at every gathering, from Wednesday fellowship to all-day singing, where stacks disappeared as quickly as they were baked. Children reached for corner pieces with extra crust, while adults appreciated how the bread stretched meals.
Stewed chicken and rice was started the morning of service, sometimes the night before. The bird, a whole hen, not a fryer, because a hen's age meant fat and flavor a young chicken couldn't give, went into the pot with onion, celery, garlic, bay leaves, black pepper, and water to cover. It simmered on low for 2 hours minimum, never boiled hard, because hard boiling makes the meat stringy and clouds the broth. When the meat came off the bone in clean pieces, the broth was strained, the rice stirred and raw to cook in the liquid until it absorbed every bit of flavor from the long simmer. Salt was added last, always last, because the broth concentrated as it cooked. This was the dish that fed the largest number for the least cost. A whole hen stretched to 12 when the rice absorbed the broth. In church kitchens from Georgia to Illinois through the 1950s, it appeared, when the congregation was large and the budget was not. The women who made it are gone. The knowledge of how slowly to go went with them. But
neck bones and rice transformed what butchers considered scraps into rich, satisfying meals with minimal expense and maximum flavor. Pork neck bones were browned in large pots until caramelized, then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until meat fell from bone. White rice served as bed for tender meat and thick gravy, providing complete nutrition. Church mothers understood neck bones required patience and proper seasoning, transforming tough cuts through slow cooking. These bones cost almost nothing at Black-owned butcher shops, making them perfect for feeding crowds on limited budgets. The dish appeared at weeknight suppers and revival meetings, where its hearty nature sustained people through hours of worship. Children learned that good food did not require expensive ingredients, just knowledge, time, and care. Neck bones and rice represented resourcefulness, allowing Black communities to thrive despite economic challenges, proving dignity and deliciousness could emerge from what others discarded.
deviled eggs went to church under a different name. You could not put the word devil on the fellowship table, not in those kitchens, not in those congregations. So they were called dressed eggs or salad eggs or simply the eggs, and everyone understood exactly what they were. The preparation was precise. Hard-boiled eggs, halved lengthwise, yolks mashed with mustard, mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, salt, and a touch of vinegar, then piped the spoon back into the whites and dusted with paprika. The paprika was mandatory, not for flavor, but for finish, the visual signal that the eggs were complete. Church, women who made them brought a specific deviled egg plate, an oval platter with molded indentations for each half, which kept them from sliding and which was understood to belong to the woman who owned it the way a cast iron skillet belongs to whoever seasoned it. These plates are in estate sales now, the eggs long gone from the tables they once anchored.
Baked macaroni and cheese was the crown jewel of every church supper, golden and bubbling beneath its crust. The noodles were cooked just enough, layered with sharp cheddar and evaporated milk in heavy pans that once belonged to someone's mother. No one used measurements, just instinct passed down through taste and touch. When that oven door opened, the smell alone made people drift toward the kitchen. The cheese melted into a silky river, clinging to each noodle until it became more than a side dish. It was family history disguised as comfort food. Kids hovered close with their plates, hoping to get the corner pieces where the cheese crisped just right. Grandmothers guarded their recipes but always shared a serving, smiling at the next generation and saying, "Now this is how it's supposed to taste." On potluck Sundays, the pan came back scraped clean, proof that love and patience never wasted. It was food that reminded people of who they were and why the best things in life take a little time to bake. Peach cobbler with hand-rolled crust arrived at church suppers in rectangular pans, golden pastry bubbling with fruit juices that caramelized at edges while centers stayed tender. Fresh peaches were sliced during summer when abundant and cheap, tossed with sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and lemon juice before being covered with pastry dough rolled thin. The cobbler baked slowly until crust turned golden and peach filling thickened into syrup pooling in corners, creating bites ranging from crispy edges to fruit-soaked centers. Churchwomen made these in home kitchens early Sunday morning, timing baking so dessert was slightly warm when served. Peaches in season cost little at roadside stands, with bruised fruit perfect since it would be cooked down anyway. The dish represented summer abundance and preserving seasonal fruit, with families often canning peaches for year-round cobblers. Children lined up eagerly, hoping for corner pieces with extra crust, while adults savored the combination that tasted like celebration.
But years before that rice pot reached its full simmer, the cornbread dressing had already claimed the big roasting pan and the place of honor on the harvest table. Cornbread dressing was baked in its own pan, made from crumbled cornbread mixed with biscuit crumbs, sautéed celery and onion, sage, poultry seasoning, eggs, black pepper, and enough chicken broth to make the mixture wet but not soupy. The ratio of cornbread to biscuit was the secret variable. Some women used all cornbread, some mixed it half and half, and neither group believed the other was doing it correctly. In Black Southern church kitchens, through the 1950s, dressing appeared at Thanksgiving, Christmas, Homecoming Sunday, and any gathering significant enough to warrant a full spread. The woman who made the dressing held a specific position at the table. The pan is gone. The position went with her.
Smothered pork chops were Sunday strength on a plate. Thick cuts of pork cooked slow in onion gravy until every bite fell apart at the touch of a fork. The grandmothers who made them did not rush anything because flavor took time and love took patience. They browned the chops in cast-iron skillets that had seen decades of dinners, letting the sizzle mark the start of the feast. Then came the onions, sliced thin, fried golden, and stirred with broth and flour until the whole kitchen smelled like home. Those pans were never washed too hard because that seasoning was history. By the time the chops were done, the gravy had turned deep and glossy, clinging to rice, biscuits, or whatever was served beside it. Folks lined up early at the church table for this dish, knowing it would be gone before the choir even finished their song. It was not fancy food, it was memory food, the kind that reminded you who raised you and how much care could live inside one skillet. Even now, if you ever smell that rich gravy cooking, It feels like stepping back into a kitchen where laughter and faith never ran out.
Bean pie appeared on Northern church tables as a quiet act of self-determination. The dish, a custard pie made from cooked navy beans, sweetened with sugar, spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla, baked in a standard pie shell until set and golden, was developed within the Nation of Islam community in Detroit in the 1930s as an alternative to sweet potato pie. The navy bean was transformed through sweetening and spicing into something smooth, sweet, and confounding to anyone who hadn't been told what they were eating. By the 1950s, bean pie had crossed into broader Black church contexts in northern cities where the Nation of Islam's influence touched the surrounding community. The pie that started as an act of dietary principle became a dessert people looked forward to. Most of the kitchens that made it have been quiet for decades. 30 dishes, and not a single one needed a recipe card to find its way to the table. The greens started on Saturday. The cake was cool before sunrise. The roast came out of the oven the minute the car pulled into the driveway, and every plate was filled before the first glass of tea was poured. Try one this week. Season the skillet, simmer the greens, bake the cornbread, and sit at the table long enough to remember what it was for. Drop in the comments the dish your family never skipped on a Sunday, the one that made the table feel complete, because somebody taught you how to make it, and that is worth holding on to.